Let's get started. Thank you so much. You know, I've been watching these on TV for years and C-SPAN. Now I'm actually on it, so it's pretty good. And when you walk in, it almost feels like you're either going to give a political speech or some acoustic performance on the, because it has that feel to it. But I'm really honored to be with you today. Thank you so much, and thank you for that introduction, and all of you for coming. This is important. This is actually, as you walk in, no matter how many times you've done this now, it's really strikes you that the presidency of the United States is the most important political office on the planet. And yet the process to get there begins here in places just like this, where our fellow citizens get to engage us and ask us questions and hear from us. And so it's really rewarding part of this campaign, and one of the most enjoyable things that I do. It's like doing an editorial meeting 5 times a day, but the editorial board are the people that you're going to serve if they give you the opportunity to serve. And so I'm grateful to all of you for being a part of this. So I think I'll begin by telling you why I'm running for president, which is the most important question that anybody running for president should have to answer. And the reason I'm running for president is because I want this to continue to be a country where people can do for their children what my parents did for me and what your parents did for you. For over 2 centuries, unique in the history of the world, this country has been a place where no matter where you started out, no matter how poor your parents were or how disconnected from power they might have been, this was the place where if you worked hard and you persevered, you would be able to go as far as your talent and your work would take you. The place where people through hard work and perseverance could achieve not just a better life for themselves, but an even better life for their children. And the result is the American miracle, exemplified by the American dream. And that's why for over 2 centuries, we have been a nation where each generation has left the next better off than themselves. That American dream is what makes us special. Every country in the world has rich people. Even the poorest country on this planet has rich people. What makes America special is here, people that don't come from wealth and privilege and who may never be rich themselves still achieve happiness because through hard work and perseverance, they achieve the life they wanted. If we ever lose that, we stop being a special country. We'll still be important. We'll still be a rich and powerful country, but we won't be a special one anymore if we ever lose that. If we ever become a country like those other places, where what you can do with your life is determined by what your parents were or did, we stop being unique and exceptional. And so it should concern us that for the first time in a very long time, a majority of Americans now believe that that dream, that attribute of ours, is no longer within reach for people like them. It should concern us that a majority of Americans don't just believe America's headed in the wrong direction, but a majority of Americans are convinced that their children will not live a life as good as their own. Why is this happening? Well, it's happening primarily for 2 reasons. One, because we are living through a time of extraordinary economic and geopolitical transformation. This economy looks nothing like the economy I grew up in, not to mention the one we had 50 years ago. And yet we have government policies that are not modernized, that do not reflect this new economy, which leads to the second reason why this is happening. And that is that in the modern history of this country, never has there been a time when the political class is more out of touch than it is today. And I wish I could just say as in one political party, but it is in both. Leaders in both parties that are both out of touch and outdated, who do not remember what it was like to live paycheck to paycheck, or perhaps never did, who do not know what it's like to owe thousands of dollars in student loans, or forgot, who do not know how difficult it is for small businesses to survive and thrive in this new environment with all of the regulations and burdens that government is imposing upon them. And the result is an extraordinary sense of frustration. And that's why this election matters more than most. Because this election is not just a choice between political parties. This election is not just a choice between ideologies. At its core, the election of 2016 is a generational choice about what kind of country we are going to be in the 21st century. For over 2 centuries, each generation of Americans has chosen to do whatever it took to keep America a special country. And now the time has come for us to make the exact same choice. And there are only 2 choices before us. There are only 2 choices that lie ahead. We will either be the first Americans to leave our children worse off than ourselves, or our children and grandchildren will be the freest and the most prosperous Americans that have ever lived. And I am confident that I know which road you want to choose. I am confident that I know which road the majority of Americans want to choose. And if in fact we choose, as I believe we will, for a future even better than our past, for a life for our children and grandchildren even better than our own, then there are some things we are going to have to do, and we're going to have to do them right now. The first thing we're going to have to do is become globally competitive again economically, because we live in a global economy. And it is an economy dramatically different, as I said earlier, than the one we had not so long ago. This will require us to turn the page on leaders and on ideas that no longer work, and instead embrace ideas and leaders relevant to the 21st century. What does globally competitive mean? It begins by having leaders that understand that government doesn't grow the economy. The private sector grows the economy. You wouldn't know that by watching the debate last night. I only caught snippets of it, but I caught enough of it to know the Democratic Party is more liberal today than it's been since Michael Dukakis, maybe even before that. You had leaders last night that were arguing, we're going to grow the economy because we're just going to build more roads and bridges. Well, I like roads and bridges, and that may help grow the economy. But only the private sector creates not just more jobs, but better paying jobs. Jobs that pay more. Jobs that provide more upward mobility. And the job of government is to make it easier for the private sector to succeed. To make America the cheapest, the fastest, the easiest place in the world. To create millions of new jobs that pay more. And that's why we need to get to work on our economic policies and modernizing them. We need a tax code that makes us globally competitive. Today, we have a tax code that makes us among the most expensive and burdensome places in the world to start a business or expand an existing one. We need a regulatory code that's flattened out and simplified and less burdensome. Today, we have billions upon billions of dollars of regulatory costs imposed on the private sector. This is especially crippling on small business, who cannot afford the army of lawyers and lobbyists necessary to comply with big government. We can't grow our economy if we have a national debt crisis. And we will have a debt crisis in this country at some point. We now owe close to $19 trillion, which is more than the size of our economy. And there is no plans in place to address it. And that's why we must deal with the drivers of our debt. The drivers of our debt is not foreign aid. It's less than 1% of our budget. The national debt is not defense spending, which is the most important obligation of the federal government. The driver of our long-term debt is the way very important programs are currently structured. Medicare, Medicaid, and Social Security. Now, I'm from Florida. You may or may not know this, but there's a lot of people in Florida on Medicare and Social Security. One of them happens to be my mother. So I can say this unequivocally right now. I am against any changes that are bad for my mother. I am against any changes that are bad for people like her. And here's the good news. We can save Social Security and Medicare without changing anything for her, people like her that are retired, or even people that are about to retire. But here's the truth that people need to start acknowledging. My Medicare and Social Security and the Medicare and Social Security of people younger than me is going to be different than the way it worked for our parents or the people on it now. One way or the other, it's going to have to, it either won't exist or it will be different. And what do I mean by different? I may have to retire a year later than my parents did. My Social Security benefits, if I've made money, are not going to grow as fast as they did for the people that are on it now. And my Medicare benefits could very well be the option of taking that and using it to buy a private plan that I like better. That is not too much to ask of me at 44 years of age, after everything my 85-year-old mother did for us. Oh, I just said her age, now she gets mad. My older mother says, that's probably not good either. She's on Social Security and Medicare, that's all you need to know. And it's gonna work different for us than it works for her, or for people that are currently retired, or people are about to retire. And if we do that, we can bring stability to this program in the long term. And we can save it, and we can balance our budget, and we don't have to change anything for the people on it now or the people about to retire. To be globally competitive, we need to fully utilize our energy resources. We've been blessed with an abundance of oil in this country. Not only should we have more of it that we explore, but we should be able to export it. Geopolitically, the impact that would have on the world is dramatic. The world will now be able to buy oil. They don't have to buy it from a gangster in Moscow anymore. They don't have to buy it from a radical Shia cleric in Tehran. They can borrow it from the most stable and freest country on the planet. We need to fully utilize our natural gas as well. This won't just lower the cost of living by making it cheaper to power utilities in this country. This will make it easier to manufacture. Energy costs are one of the most significant overhead costs of manufacturing. And if America becomes, from an energy perspective, more affordable than other countries, you're going to have a manufacturing renaissance, which means we can once again be a country that makes things again, not simply a country that does things only. And last but not least, if we want to become globally competitive, we must repeal and replace Obamacare. We must get rid of it, and we must replace it. And we must replace it with a system that allows every American to be in charge of their own health care insurance issues and their own ideas, that will allow you to take your own pre-tax money, whether it's your own money, it came from your employer, or it comes from a tax credit, and you can use it to buy health insurance of the kind you've decided you want from any company across state lines that will sell them to you. This will drive choices, and this will drive competition. It will lower prices and include and improve coverage, and it is a lot better than putting the government in charge of your health insurance. And it is a lot better than a program that we have in place now that's raising prices and lowering quality. And I'm confident that if we can do these things that I've just outlined, the American private sector is going to take care of the rest. These are the most innovative, the most creative, and the most productive people on the planet. The American private sector, represented by many, if not all of you here today, will not only create millions of new jobs, if we allow this country to be globally competitive, they're going to create millions of better paying jobs, jobs that pay substantially more than the jobs we have today. The truth is, those new jobs are going to require more skills than ever, however. And so the second thing we have to do is we must modernize what we mean when we say higher education. You see, some of the best jobs of the 21st century are going to require more than high school, but less than 4 years of traditional college. And that's why we must once again reinvigorate vocational training in America. We need to stop telling young Americans that those are the jobs for kids that can't get into college. Nothing could be further from the truth. A welder makes more than a philosopher. And so we need to produce more welders in this country, more machinists, more plumbers, more airplane mechanics. And we don't need to wait till they're 25 to do that. We should open up federal financial aid so that students could do that at 16 and 17 years of age. So they can go to high school in the morning and trade school in the afternoon. And when they graduate, they don't just get a high school diploma. They are industry certified and ready to work at a good paying job, some of the fastest growing jobs of the 21st century. We need more competition and choices in traditional four-year colleges. And that's why I think we need to open it up for more competition, more innovation, for technology to enter the higher education space. There are already providers that are trying to do that despite government obstacles. Programs that allow someone who's 30 years old, who has to work full-time and raise a family, to get credit for what they already know. We're not going to make you sit in a classroom and take courses on things you've already mastered on your own, through life experience, through military experience. You get credit for what you can prove you already know or learned. And whatever you're missing for your degree, you will be allowed to learn it from a variety of sources, including free online coursework. Creating an alternative accrediting process that allows people to package learning from a variety of sources will open up higher education for millions of people who have to work full-time and raise a family, who cannot afford to drop everything and sit in a classroom for 2 to 4 years to become a paralegal, or to become a dental hygienist, or to become any of these other professions that pay a lot more than the jobs some of these people are currently trapped in. And we're still going to have traditional four-year colleges. But we cannot continue to have people borrowing thousands of dollars to pay for degrees that do not lead to jobs. Which is why when I'm president, we will pass a law called Right to Know Before You Go, and I will sign it. And here's what that law says. It says that before any student takes out a student loan, the school has to tell you how much people make when they graduate from that school with that degree. So you can decide if you're going to borrow $50,000 to take on that degree. Because you deserve to know before you borrow thousands of dollars whether or not you're going to be able to find a job with a degree from that school. We're not going to ban these degrees. We're not going to say no one can study political science, no one can study Greek philosophy. You can study whatever you want, but you deserve to know that the market for philosophers has tightened significantly over the last 2,000 years. If we can do these two things, make America globally competitive again, and create policies that make it easier and cheaper for people to acquire the skills they need for these better jobs, the globally competitive economy will create, we're not going to have an economic recovery. America's going to have an economic renaissance, an era of growth and prosperity unlike anything we've seen in modern times. But that won't matter if we don't do the third thing, and that is keep our people and our nation safe. It is the most important obligation of the federal government. In fact, it is the reason why we have a federal government. Federal government's involved in all sorts of things it has no business being involved in. Federal government has no business, for example, being involved in K through 12 education. We don't need a national curriculum. We don't need a Common Core. We don't need a national school board. But there's something the federal government has to do that only the federal government can do, and that is keep us safe. And it is failing in that regard at every level. It's failing to protect our sovereignty. As you've seen, the illegal immigration issue continues to grow worse and has not improved. It's also failed, but it's also failed to protect us abroad. Look at the world around us today. You have a lunatic in North Korea with nuclear weapons. You have Iran about to receive $150 billion of sanctions relief, which they will use to build long-range missiles and one day either buy or build a nuclear weapon of their own. You have a gangster in Moscow threatening NATO, threatening to divide Europe, and sowing instability in the Middle East. You have multiple radical jihadist groups across multiple continents that aren't just threatening their neighbors, they're recruiting Americans online to attack us here at home. And then last but not least, in the face of all this, you have the Chinese rapidly expanding their military capabilities, taking over the South China Sea, and hacking into our computers, stealing our government secrets, our company secrets, the private information of Americans. And in the face of all of these threats, what are we doing as a government under Barack Obama? We are demoralizing and destroying our military capability with these short-sighted defense cuts via the sequester that don't do anything to balance our budget. The sequester is not doing a thing about balancing our budget because defense spending is not the reason why we have a debt. But this sequester, these defense cuts, are the reason why one day we will not be able to protect our country. It is the reason why one day we will not be able to live up to the commitment we make to our men and women in uniform, which is this, that we will never put them in a fair fight. That anytime we ask them to fight on our behalf, they will have better weapons, better training, and better information than their adversary. This is a promise we've made to our men and women in uniform, and we will not be able to keep that promise if we keep destroying defense spending in this country. And so when I'm president, it will be about my highest priorities to restore our military and ensure that it has sufficient funding that it needs to confront the challenges of the 21st century. And when they come home, after taking care of us, we will have a VA system that takes care of our veterans. We will have a VA system. We will have a VA system where if someone isn't doing their job, they will be able to get fired. I'm proud that I passed a law last year that allows the VA secretary to fire executives at the VA that aren't doing their job. The sad part is they've only fired one person. When I'm president, people are going to get fired if they're not doing their jobs at the VA. And the other thing is we need to ensure that the VA benefits follow the veteran, not the veteran have to follow the VA benefits. If you're a veteran, if you are a veteran and someone at the VA cannot see you in a timely fashion, you will be able to portably take that benefit to any hospital, any doctor, any provider that will see you and will take that form of payment. And the third thing we need is a foreign policy of moral clarity. And what does that mean? Well, simply it means this. Our allies know they can trust us, and our adversaries know not to test us, which is direct opposite of what we have right now. There's no better example of this than what's happening in the Middle East. There is only one pro-American free enterprise democracy in the Middle East. That's the state of Israel. There's only one pro-American free enterprise democracy. And today we have a president that treats the prime minister of Israel with less respect than he treats the Ayatollah in Iran. That will change. If I'm blessed to be president of the United States, our allies will know they can rely on us, and our adversaries will know not to test us. And if we can do all of this that I just mentioned to you, if we can protect our country from threats, if we can rebuild our economy by making it globally competitive, and if we can make it easier, faster, and cheaper for our people to acquire the skills they need to benefit from the new economy, then the 21st century is going to be the greatest era in our history. If we fail, if we do nothing, then you and I will be part of the first generation in the history of this country that leaves our children worse off than ourselves. Now, I know that times are hard, and I've pointed through all these challenges primarily to inspire you to believe that we can fix them all, because we can. All of these challenges before us, we can fix. And here's the truth. This is not new for us as Americans. For this nation has always faced great challenges. Ours is not the story of a country that had it easy. Ours is the story of a nation that for over 2 centuries has always confronted great challenges and has always faced them, overcome them, and as a result embraced its opportunities. This was a nation founded out of a great challenge. To declare your independence from the most powerful empire in the world at the time, that was a great challenge. Then this nation had to face a civil war that violently divided it and almost, quite frankly, ended it. Then this was a nation that had to confront a great world war, and then a Great Depression, and then a second world war, and then a Cold War, and then the 1960s, an incredibly tumultuous time, where the Civil Rights era, where the Vietnam War, where the political assassinations that happened in this country all seemed to rip this nation at the seams. And yet time and again, each generation before us did what they had to do. And it wasn't easy, but they confronted their challenges and they embraced their opportunities. And as a result, everyone in this room today inherited from the Americans that came before us, not a perfect country, but the best one in the world, and a nation better than the one that they grew up in. Now our time has come. Now the time has come for this generation to do its part. And that's why this election is so important. Because we can't do that if we just keep electing the same people with the same ideas. We can't do that if we just promote the next person in line or the most familiar name or the person the experts tell us we have to vote for. The time has come for us as both a party and a nation to turn the page and elevate new leaders with new ideas relevant to the times in which we live. This is what we're being asked to do now. This is why I support term limits. And this is why I'm running for president. This is why after just 4 years in the Senate, I chose not to run for re-election and instead aspire to the highest office in the land. Because I know if we keep electing the same people, nothing is going to change. You know, it's interesting. When I first ran for the Senate about 4.5 years ago, the entire Republican establishment in Washington, D.C. lined up against me. They actively worked against me on behalf of my opponent, who at the time was the sitting governor of Florida. And we were successful, obviously. And it's interesting, 4.5 years later when I chose to run, some of the same people came out of the woodwork again to tell me that it wasn't my turn, that I had to wait in line. I didn't know there was a line. And I don't know exactly what we're waiting for. We can't afford another 4 years like the last 8. If we have another 4 years like the last 8, this speech I just gave you, I may not be able to give it. It may not be true that we can solve some of these problems. It may not be true that we can avoid leaving our children worse off than ourselves. The time to act is now. And this is a calling on all of us. Every single one of us, in and out of government, in and out of politics. We are all called to do our part. Some of you already have. I can see from your hats and shirts that you are veterans that served our country in uniform, and we are grateful for your service. I've been blessed with the opportunity to try to do it in public office. And I've always approached it with an acknowledgement that America doesn't owe me a thing. This country owes me nothing. But I have a debt to America I will never fully repay. Because for me, America isn't just the country I was born in. This is the nation that literally changed the history of my family. Neither one of my parents was born in America. Some of you are maybe familiar with our story. They were born on the island of Cuba to families that weren't rich, famous, powerful, disconnected from any sort of privilege. And they came to America in 1956 because it was the one place on earth where people like them, through hard work, had a chance at a better life. My father had it particularly difficult. When he was 4 days shy of his 9th birthday, his mother passed away. And so my father had to stop going to school and start working. He would never go back to school. And he would work for the next 70 years of his life. In America, my parents had all sorts of jobs. My mother she built aluminum chairs at a factory. Then she was a cashier at a coffee shop on Miami Beach. Then she was at a coffee shop and a hotel on Miami Beach. She was a maid at a hotel in Las Vegas and a stock clerk at Kmart in Miami. My father was primarily a bartender. He worked on nights and on weekends and on holidays, on days I'm sure he didn't feel like working. That wasn't the dream he once had for himself, by the way. He was grateful for his work. But when he was a young man and a young boy, he had big dreams because young people have big dreams. But his dreams became impossible. And so when they came to America, my parents found a new dream, a new purpose for their life. And it was to give us the chance to do all the things they never could. They didn't want what happened to them to happen to us. They wanted to make sure that all the doors that had closed for them would be open for their children. And so that's why my parents worked so hard, my father in particular. He stood behind a small portable bar in the back of a banquet hall in a hotel for decades. So one day I could have the chance to be whatever my talent and my work would allow me to be. The journey from behind that portable bar to the life I live today, for me, that journey is the essence of the American dream. It's what makes us a special country and different. And it's not just my story. As Americans, it's our story. For who among us is not but a generation or two removed from someone who did that for us? Here in America, we are all but a generation or two removed from someone who made our future the purpose of their lives. And it reminds us that whether or not we remain a special country will be determined by whether or not that journey is still possible for the people trying to make it now. And that's the great calling of our time. We don't just want to save the American dream. We want to expand it so that it reaches more people and changes more lives than ever before. And that future is within our reach. And that's why I'm here today and in the next few minutes that we're going to be together to answer your questions, to do what it takes to hopefully earn your support and then to keep it. And then to encourage you to go out and find more people to support us. Because I believe with all my heart that if we can do this and do this together, we won't just change our party, we'll change the direction of this country. And in so doing, we will be able to say that our children were actually left with a country better than our own. And the 21st century wasn't just as good as the 20th century for America. It actually was better. It was actually a new American century. So thank you for the chance to speak to you. I'm looking forward to your questions. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you. All right, let's get started. So, is there one microphone or two? All right, we have two microphones, so please find the young people, the young man, the young lady with the flags. They have the microphone. If you can flag them down, or not flag, let them flag you down, I guess. And we'll use the microphones for the questions. Yes, sir.
Excuse me. My question is, how does your faith affect what you do?
In terms of my life or my politics? Both?
Everything.
Well, my faith has a huge influence on me. I hope it does, because my faith teaches me to care for the less fortunate. And obviously, the first thing I learned from my faith is the most important job I have is the husband and father. The most influential job I will ever have is the 16, 15, 17 years I have to influence my children and who they become. And not just by what I say to them, but by what they see me do. In public service, it influences me in a lot of different ways. First, our nation was founded on a spiritual principle, on the notion that we're all created equal because we're endowed by our Creator with certain rights, life and liberty and the pursuit of happiness. And the only reason why we have a government isn't to grant those rights, but to protect those rights. I believe that every human being has God-given rights that the job of government is to protect. And so that influences me deeply. Beyond it, I would argue that it's one of the reasons why I've come to be a strong supporter of free enterprise. Because it's the only economic model in the history of the world where people can achieve their potential, even if they aren't born into great wealth or privilege. If you travel around the world, here's what you're going to find. The more the government dominates the economy, the more that people influence government win at the expense of everybody else. And so when you go around the world, here's what you're going to find. You're going to find societies where the same rich families and the same big companies have dominated those countries decade after decade. Only in free enterprise can an employee become an employer. Only in free enterprise can someone that's born into a family that isn't poor or connected, through hard work, discipline, self-control, and talent, achieve a better life for themselves, and in fact, maybe even put their former boss out of business because you're better at it than they are. That's why I love free enterprise. That's why I'm a strong supporter, because I think it's the best program to eradicate poverty. The only way to eradicate poverty is to allow people to find better paying jobs, and free enterprise does that better than any other economic model in the world. So my faith has influenced me to care about the less fortunate. I do support a safety net. I don't think free enterprise works without a safety net to help catch people that are having a tough time. But I also know that the safety net cannot be a way of life. It cannot become a lifestyle. And in fact, it's become that for many people. And my faith also teaches me that that's not good for the soul. It's not good for people. It's not good for their aspirations for the future. So for all those reasons, I'm glad my faith influences my role in government as well as the way I try to govern myself in my life.
Hi, Governor. What I'd like to do is ask you a question. I feel a little uncomfortable even saying it. I've done a lot of research. I've watched your stump speech a couple of times, and I haven't heard anything new, so I want you to say something new here. And my question is about military spending. You said before, and I totally agree, the government's role is the military. And you also said that you wouldn't cut your mother's Social Security. Great, two things I really like. But I have a hard time balancing the two, in that military spending, yes, has been cut recently, but we're still investing in, the super jets. We have multiple hundreds of bases throughout the world. I think there's a lot of waste in our Pentagon spending, and I don't want taxes to be raised to pay for government spending at the expense of the younger people that are not in this audience that are going to suffer with a cut in Social Security.
It's a good question. So let me first begin by saying that defense spending is not the reason why we have the debt. And I agree with you about waste. I'm not in favor of waste in any program. Even if the program is a small portion of our budget, we should never be throwing away taxpayer money. And so I do support reforms in contracting. We need more competition, for example, in defense contracting. Because, for example, any of you that are in business will know this. If there's only one bidder on a project, you're not going to get the best price. And in many instances, that's what we find in defense spending. So there's no doubt we need to do a better job of it. But we also have to understand the threats this nation faces are significant. And in fact, economic implications of global instability are greater than they've ever been. This is the most powerful nation on earth, the most important nation in the country, in the world, the largest economy in the world, and we are economically impacted by global instability. And one of the things that helps ensure global stability is a strong U.S. Military. It actually prevents war. And every time we've cut defense spending in this country significantly, we've had to come back later and make up for it, and it costs a lot more money. There's a fundamental misunderstanding about the debt. The issue with the debt isn't just the sheer amount of dollars that we owe, it's what it represents as a percentage of our overall economy. And right now, it's too large. If you think of the economy as a pie and the debt as a slice of that pie, well, today the debt is as big as the pie. And we have a big problem. So the only way to deal with the debt is the combination of dynamic and sustained economic growth that makes the economy bigger, but also reforms that hold the line on spending increases in the future. And the majority of the spending increases in the future are going to come from mandatory spending programs for future generations when they retire. People like me and like my children. Those programs will not be able to afford us in the out years if we don't make reforms on how they work for us. And so the good news is if we can make those reforms now, we can bring those mandatory spending programs, the arc of their spending, under control. But we also have to do the economic growth component of it. You have to do both, which is why I led off by talking about how we're going to grow our economy. That brings the debt under a manageable level. So for example, if our debt was $2 trillion, not 19, we'd be very happy. It's still a lot of money, but that's $2 trillion for a $19 trillion economy. If Italy had a $2 trillion debt, they'd be very concerned because they only have a $2 trillion economy. So our goal is to make our economy bigger and hold the line on the growth in our debt by reforms to the mandatory spending program. That brings the spending on an arc that's more sustainable, and suddenly the debt becomes much more manageable. But cutting defense spending has never worked. Cutting waste, absolutely. But cutting defense spending has never worked. We need to modernize our long-range bomber. We're still using the B-52. One of the key components of our nuclear triad is the Ohio-class submarines. They need to be modernized. We still need more of those jets that you mentioned because stealth technology has never mattered more than in the 21st century. We're seeing force reductions in our Army of 40,000 positions. We're on track to have the oldest and the smallest Navy and Air Force in the modern history of this country at a time when every one of our potential adversaries is expanding rapidly their own capabilities. The Russian economy is in total collapse, but they've held the line on military spending harmless. The Chinese are undergoing the most aggressive military expansion in the history of the world. The North Koreans, led by a lunatic, possess dozens of nuclear weapons and a long-range missile that can already hit the United States. The Iranians are about to get $150 billion of sanctions relief, which they're not going to use to build bridges and hospitals. They're going to use it to sponsor terrorism. They're going to use it to build a long-range missile that can hit the United States. And eventually they're going to use it to build a nuclear weapon or buy one. These are real threats. And none of these other things we're going to talk about matter if we aren't safe. And a military component of it is critical.
Yes, I'd like to ask a question. While you were in the Senate, I looked up and I discovered that you'd missed more votes than anybody there, Republican or Democrat, over 8%. And also one last week, which had to do with military spending that you weren't there at. And just wanted to know what your
because I'm running for president. I'm here in New Hampshire talking to you. And here's why. Because I've been in the Senate now for 4 years. And I'm proud to serve the people of Florida in the United States Senate. Some of the most rewarding things we do in the Senate, for example, is constituent service. People come to your office. I've been through a drive-thru at McDonald's. And the lady comes with a story that she has about her family, and it's incredibly rewarding to be able to help her. I've had veterans who have issues with the VA. My brother's one of them, and being able to help them. All of that's very rewarding, and we love doing that very much. But I'm frustrated. I'm in Washington, D.C., watching all these problems we just talked about, and nothing is happening. Then I see we just win the majority in 2014, and still nothing happens. And what I concluded is nothing's going to change here unless we put the right person in the White House. And that's why I decided to run for president. And to run for president means you are going to miss votes. Everyone who's ever run for president out of the Senate has missed votes. Why? Because I'm here talking to voters. I'm not on vacation. I'm here talking to each of you about the future of America. And I hope that we can be successful in this campaign so we can start to make a difference. So the next time they take votes in the Senate in a year and a half, they won't be show votes. There'll be votes we can actually pass, and we'll have a president that will actually sign it. Sign things like the Keystone Pipeline. Sign things like rebuilding the military.
I have 4 children in middle school and high school, and my question is, as president, what will you do to put education back in the hands of parents and local government?
Yes.
Give us more choice and free us, parents, students, and teachers, from Common Core.
On my first day in office, I will sign an order ordering every and all U.S. federal agencies that are involved in the implementation of Common Core to cease and desist from all work in implementing it. I support curriculum reform. I support curriculum reform. And we did it in Florida when I was the Speaker of the House. We improved our curriculum at the state level. And let me tell you why that's important. Because if you have a problem with a school curriculum, or any of you have a problem with a school curriculum, you can go see your school board member, you can go see the principal, you can go see your legislator. Try going to the Department of Education at the federal level. You won't find a person to talk to about it. We don't need a national school board. In fact, I don't even think we need a Department of Education at the federal level. And I feel real strongly about that as a parent myself. Where's the flag? Oh, yeah.
Senator, I served in Iraq, and I had the pleasure of having 12.5 Iraqi foreign nationals working for me as translators and going out on missions. These were people who had their backgrounds checked and were fully vetted, and they had no promise of any consideration for getting out of the country if things went south, which indeed they did. Now currently in the news, we see about refugees out of Syria and figuring out what countries are going to take what percentage of refugees who aren't vetted. And I'm wondering, if president, would you support policies where people who put themselves and their families at personal risk to serve with our servicemen go to the back of the line, and we let unvetted personnel or people go to the front of the line?
Yeah, it makes no sense. You're absolutely right. Not only that, it hurts our credibility. You know, this word gets around. I mean, it's not like these people go quietly into the night. I mean, they tell other people, the Americans betrayed me, or the Americans turned their back on us. That reputation becomes embedded in the region. It's one of the things that Putin is taking advantage of, maybe not that specific instance, but in general. The argument that Putin's using in the Middle East is Barack Obama is an unreliable guy. You know, he talks a lot, but he doesn't really do anything. Look at us. We were here 2 weeks, and we're already, conducting operations. And we're reliable, and America isn't. He's making that argument to Iraq, but he's going to make the same argument to the Egyptians, the Saudis, even the Israelis. And so you're absolutely right about that. And on the issue of refugees, let me just say this. We've always accepted refugees in this country. We accepted them from Vietnam after the fall of South Vietnam. I live in a community with refugees, people that came from Cuba fleeing communism. It's not that we don't want to accept refugees. It's that in order to accept them, they have to be vetted. And it just isn't easy to vet someone from Syria. You can't just pick up the phone and call someone over there and say, hey, do you know so-and-so? The phones aren't working that well right now in Syria, among other things. So it's not that we don't want to do it, it's that we may not be able to do it. It may not be possible to vet people, and as a result, we may not be able to accept refugees because of that. But the instance you pointed out, people that have served alongside our men and women in uniform, who risk their lives and the lives of their families by being identified with us, it is wrong that people like that have been pushed to the back of the line.
Senator, I have to say I've heard you speak several times about climate control and not fighting it because the U.S. can't win the battle alone. China has recently introduced a groundbreaking program to limit carbon emissions with a cap-and-trade program. And I'm wondering, when you are president, what will you do to match their commitment to fighting climate change?
Well, first of all, the Chinese have said that in the year 2030, they're going to begin to do some stuff. We'll see. Number one, they continue to emit more carbon into the atmosphere than any other nation on Earth. The second point I would make is, look, the climate is always changing. There's never been a time when the climate was unchanged. The debate for me as a policymaker is, what can we do about it? So I have these people come forward as a policymaker and say, we want you to pass this law, cap and trade, or whatever it may be. And I ask them, okay, well, if we pass this law, how many inches of sea rise will it prevent? Well, it won't prevent any, at least not for 150 years, and only if other countries do the same thing. Okay, so it won't really be measurable impact on the environment. On the other hand, I asked the economists, what will this do to our economy? Well, it'll make living in America more expensive. It'll make it harder to hire people. It'll make it more difficult for businesses to succeed in America as opposed to somewhere else. So I'm presented with these options that have deep economic costs, no environmental benefit. How is that a good deal for the country? As president, I'm not going to support anything that hurts our economy and does nothing to help our environment. Now, do I believe this issue is one that can be confronted over time? Yes, I do. You know how? I think the American innovator is going to help solve a lot of this by making us more energy efficient. I have no problem in leading the world in solar and wind and bio renewables and so forth, but we're also going to lead the world in oil and natural gas. We are not going to emasculate the American economy and hold ourselves back from economic growth and development, especially at a time when millions of Americans are struggling, stuck in low-paying jobs that are leaving them living paycheck to paycheck, and in some instances working and on public assistance. And so I'm not supporting any policies that are bad for our economy and do nothing for our environment. Hi.
I actually don't do this kind of thing, and a friend of mine brought me here, and I have been following you.
It's not that bad, is it?
No, it's actually pretty cool. I have been following you. And I noticed you're talking about, you know, you have children. You have young children. And a lot of these people here are veterans. But what about our generation, the ones that count now, the ones that our votes are going to be going for, the one that Social Security is going to be taken away from? What do you want to do? How are we going to get better paying jobs? You're talking about education, changing education, which is great for the younger generation coming up. But you got us who are working paycheck to paycheck, barely making it, working, you know, 2 jobs. We can't get ahead, and we don't fall under the tax break. We don't fall under the Obamacare. We fall through the cracks. It's our generation now in the 30s and the 40s that are suffering the most. How, as a president, what is something you can do as a president in the next 4 years to help us?
Well, first of all, we're going to have a pro-family tax code. And one of the things I've called for is an increase in the per-child tax credit, because for working families, it's more expensive than ever to raise children. But beyond it, here's the bottom line. We need to create government policies that make it easier for the private sector to create jobs for you that pay more. And that's not happening right now. Jobs that pay more are not being created. That's why when they say, oh, the unemployment rate is down to 5%, there's 2 things they aren't telling you. Number 1 is the millions of people that aren't even looking for work anymore, so they don't count towards the count anymore. And number 2, the jobs that are being created don't pay enough. You can't live on those jobs. We need to make America the best place in the world to create jobs that pay more. And what's holding that back? I'll tell you what's holding it back. A lot of it is government policies that make it harder to hire people, that make it more expensive to hire people. Obamacare, which you say you don't even benefit from, makes it more expensive to hire people and more expensive to pay them more. So they don't hire more people and they don't pay them more. Regulations, especially for small business, makes it more expensive to be in business. For the first time in 35 years, we have more businesses start dying than starting. That's not good for job creation. We don't allow companies to immediately expense their investment. If I invest money in a small business to grow it, I have to take that money back in my taxes over a large number of years, as opposed to getting it back right at once. If we had a tax code that said the more you invest in your business, the less you're going to owe in taxes, not only would they hire more people, they'd be able to pay people more. Well, that's why we need to reform the tax code. We can't be globally competitive with the most expensive business tax rate in the developed world. We have to make America the best place in the world for the private sector to succeed. In turn, the private sector will create jobs that pay more. And it goes back to the point I've always made to people. My father was not a business owner. He owned like a small grocery store for probably a second and a half. It didn't go well. But my father was largely an employee. He worked as an employee at a hotel. The reason why my father had a job that paid enough for him to be able to support his family was someone who had access to money risked that money to build that hotel. And Americans made enough money after they paid their taxes and their bills that they could take vacations to Miami Beach. We need to get back to a place in our economy where people are incentivized to create more sources of employment that pay more so that people can make more money. And then we also have to ensure that our government isn't doing anything to make your life more expensive by passing ridiculous executive orders that make your energy bill go up while your income is flat. And the other thing is, some of those better paying jobs are going to require more skills than some people have right now. I don't know your story, but I would venture to guess that if you're working full-time, or both of you are working full-time, you can't just drop everything and sit in a classroom for 4 years. But if we can make it easier and cheaper for you to acquire an additional skill through a couple hours, through 2 courses online that allow you to receive a certificate, suddenly you qualify for the new job that pays more. We have to make it easier for you to do that as well. And my policies are all designed around that. That's what my policies are designed around. Make America the best place in the world to create better paying jobs and make it easier for you to acquire the additional skills you need to qualify for those better paying jobs.
Senator, this will be our last question today.
Okay. Well, we'll get Regina's too, so go ahead.
Senator, thank you for
Bring
coming
that
to
microphone
Derry.
here. Thank you for having me.
My question is on the Constitution.
Yes, sir.
Article 5. There's a movement throughout this nation right now to have an Article 5 convention. Do you approve that, disapprove it, and if so, why?
If that's what citizens want, we should do it. My only concern is, and this is what I've raised to people that have called it, just make sure we know how it's going to turn out. Because if you open up the Constitution, you're also opening up to people that want to re-examine the First Amendment, people that want to re-examine the Second Amendment, people that want to re-examine some other fundamental protections that are built in within the Constitution. But ultimately, there's a provision that exists for citizens to amend their Constitution and re-examine it. And if our citizens want to do that, then I'll be supportive of it. But just be aware that the same groups that are trying to pass legislation to violate the Constitution are the same groups of people that are going to try to change that Constitution. We're going to have to fight them at that convention.
Senator, the next president is going to be able to appoint 1, maybe 2 more Supreme Court justices. What is going to be your criteria for appointing them?
My criteria for appointing justices, not just Supreme Court justices, but justices especially at the appellate level, at every level of government, are people that adhere to that Constitution, that view the role of an appellate judge to apply the Constitution, not to creatively manipulate it, not to creatively spin it to reach a policy conclusion that they want. We've now reached a point in this country where we have judges basically who believe, we have justices, at least 5 on the Supreme Court, who believe that their job is to find creative ways to manipulate the Constitution to reach a policy outcome that they personally favor. That is not the job of our justices. The job of our justices is to apply that Constitution as strictly constructed under the founders, by the founders and by the amendments that followed it. The job of the appellate courts is to apply the Constitution, not to expand it or manipulate it. And so my number 1 criteria will be this. Are you a strict constructionist? Do you believe the Constitution as written should be lived by? And you understand that the only way to change that Constitution is through a convention or an amendment process, not through creative judicial decisions that expand the reach of the federal government and of that Constitution to areas it was never intended to reach. At the end of the day, that document that this gentleman was just holding a moment ago is a document of limitation. The Constitution is a document that limits the power of government. It basically says very straightforward, these are the only powers the federal government has. And if they're not outlined here, the federal government doesn't have these powers. They belong to the states, local communities, and primarily to people. And we need justices that understand that. We need that today more than ever before. All right. Well, I want to thank you. And I would stay longer. The only reason why I have to cut it short is I do have to catch an airplane somewhere, and it's not a private one, so they don't wait for me. But the good news is we're going to be back, particularly in this community, and we've enjoyed this tremendously. And again, I'm going to stay around for a few more minutes to say hello to you in person, and I look forward to seeing all of you again. Thank you for coming. God bless you.